Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to talk about Kyle Mooney's new film, Y2K. This movie stars Jaeden Martell, Rachel Zegler, Julian, Dennison, amongst other people, including one cameo that we'll be getting into a little bit later on in this video. But this movie is in the vein of other, apocalyptic comedies like Zombieland and This Is the End. This movie is also produced by A24, and so I had some excitement going to this film despite some of its more mixed reactions from critics online. And you know what? I had fun with this movie. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but in terms of an apocalyptic comedy, it's fairly simple and is exactly what I wanted it to be. And so I will be getting to this movie with full spoilers because I want to talk about the cameo inside this film that I had no idea was going to be in it. And so if you haven't seen the movie, go check it out, come back here and let's get into Y2K. So if I were to try to pitch this movie to anybody that doesn't really know what they're getting into, I definitely say it's Superbad meets Zombieland. But instead of zombies, it is what if the Y2K bug actually happened in the New Year's of 1999 and robots came over to take over the world. It's that, coming of age teen comedy, a genre that I really do love, mixed with that post-apocalyptic comedy that blew up in the early 2000s, like Zombieland, like This Is the End. And honestly, I feel like this movie was made in that era. If you told me that, this movie was just kind of locked in a vault and, was released 10 years too late, that's exactly what this movie feels like. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because, yeah, there's nothing in this movie that is truly original or unique that A24 is usually known for. But I do think it's a combination and just a vibe, and the nostalgia in it is enough, at least for me as an audience member who does get a lot of the jokes in here, to really enjoy myself in the theater. And that's honestly the most you can ask for from a movie like this. And I do think a lot of that does hinge upon the cast of this movie, because they do need to be funny. They do need to be relatable and likable for you to enjoy the journey that they're going on in this film. And I think that Jaeden Martell does a good job in roles like this, where he's playing that, awkward teenager that doesn't really know how to go up and talk to the girls. He played this very well in the It movies and some of the other films and TV shows that he's been in recent years. And, he fits right in here in his typecast role that he's been getting in Hollywood. And unfortunately, this character was just a little bit too relatable for me, especially when it comes to the sequence where he decides to leave the collective with the other two people that don't fit into this group. And he has this conversation with Rachel Zegler's character, essentially saying that this has been the worst day of his life. He lost his best friend. All this crazy stuff is happening in this night. And he thought that maybe if he just got to spend some time with the girl that he really liked, maybe it'd make it all worth it. But in doing so, in spending that time with her, he realizes that, yeah, he's not getting the attention that he wanted from her, or this is not going the way that he wanted it to go. And just being around her causes, honestly, a lot more pain to him than he was expecting. And I think that feeling and that performance he gave, especially in that scene and throughout this entire movie, was extremely relatable for me. And opposite Jaeden Martell, you have Rachel Zegler, who's been everywhere in Hollywood, especially recently. And I do like her as an actress, although I do get some of the complaints about her, overly expressive acting. She does come from, acting on stage, acting in plays and musicals. And, you kind of do need to project in that sort of way when you're acting on a stage. But on film, you get those close-ups and you get to see the very over-the-top faces that she has and expressions that she has throughout this movie, which is used to some comedic effect, especially when it comes to the ending where they're doing the hacking at the end of the film and it has that montage with the crossfades of her reaction and Jaeden Martell's reaction. At that point, it's really funny to see, but there are some times where it's a little bit distracting from her. But I do find her character to be a really, fun one and a fun presence in this movie. I do think that her comedy does work in here as well. And I honestly think that their chemistry was decent enough. And one of the highlights when it does come to the cast of this movie is Julian Dennison as Danny, as Eli's best friend. And honestly, I wish he was in this movie more because, Julian Dennison is always a win. Hunter for the Wilder People is hilarious. He's phenomenal in that film. He's also great and really funny in Deadpool 2. And honestly, this character that he's playing inside of this movie is perfect for him and his comedic sensibilities. I thought he was hilarious in the first third of this movie, but he had essentially the early death in the movie that kind of honestly reminded me a lot of Nick Frost's death in Shaun of the Dead. And it just happened way too soon because I really liked that friendship and that dynamic. And I wanted to see that carry through this film, but, you kind of had to get rid of this friendship in order to focus on the, the romantic subplot between Eli and Laurie. So it makes sense that they killed him at that point inside of this film so we can focus on that storyline. But it just really hurt because obviously I love him as an actor and he was one of the funniest parts of the movie, but I do get it from a story standpoint. It just felt a little bit too early, maybe at the midpoint, maybe not at the end of the first act. I don't know. I just wish there was more of him. I also just found out that Garrett was played by Kyle Mooney himself, which is even funnier because I think if you were to ask me before I found that out, if you were to ask me what I thought the director of Y2K would look like, I would honestly guess Garrett. That's exactly who I'd expect to direct a film like this. And he was honestly a very funny character in this movie. And quite frankly, I think everybody knows a Garrett inside of their life. And the white guy with dreads line that Rachel Zegler had in this movie was hysterical. And his death scene was also very funny to see as well. He was just another really great comedic character inside of this film. But I think everybody's going to walk out of this movie talking about Fred Durst's extended cameo and honestly role inside of this film when it comes to any character inside of this movie, because yeah, Fred Durst is a character as himself inside of this movie, and it's hilarious, especially if you are a Limp Bizkit fan. And honestly, I have a funny story to tell. The reason why I know Fred Durst in the cultural zeitgeist is not because I was a fan of Limp Bizkit or I really know the band all too well. I've definitely heard some of the songs, but I'm not honestly that big of a music person. You guys can attack me in the comments like the characters did attack Rachel Zegler's character for the exact same comments, but honestly, if it wasn't for Smosh, I'd have no idea who the guy is.
Fred, not doing it so hot.
Days where you don't want to wake up. Everybody sucks. And you don't know why.
Oh wait, the microphone, go for it.
Ripping someone's head off.
That is a clip from a recent Smosh Games video that is honestly really funny. 4 cast members dress up as ridiculous characters, and they play darts essentially for 40 minutes, and it is the funniest thing ever. And Spencer Agnew's impression of Fred Darts in this video is the greatest thing that's ever happened on Smosh. It's honestly hilarious, and if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't even know Limp Bizkit or that song. And the fact that that song was used several times throughout this movie is hysterical. Every single time it happened, I was laughing for a reason that nobody else in the audience was laughing.
No human contact. And if you interact, your life is on contract.
And that brings me to the comedy of this movie along with the nostalgia. And yeah, Call Me a Sucker, it really worked for me as somebody who was born in the late 90s. So I didn't really get to experience a lot of the things that were inside of this movie, although I do get a lot of the references. Again, Smosh has, a lot of references to the early 90s because that's when a lot of their cast members was born. It's very much a millennial YouTube channel at this point in time. And I think I missed the boat by about 5 to 10 years, but I do still get a lot of the references that are made here. And yeah, the comedy did really work for me. And honestly, there's so many things that are, 80s nostalgia in terms of the films and TV that we get here that, getting a lot of 90s nostalgia recently has been a lot of fun. And eventually we'll get to the 2000s nostalgia. I think we've gotten some of it so far in other films and TV shows, but really I think this is the sweet spot where it's getting into a lot of relatability, at least for me personally. And yeah, does that make me feel a little bit old? I guess not quite yet, because this movie I feel like is just a little bit too old for me, but even still, it was very funny to me. And just to rattle off a couple of the funniest moments for me inside of this movie, honestly, I had to say anything with Fred Durst in this movie was hysterical. The fact that the CJ character got approval from Fred Durst in his death was very funny to me. Also, the fact that they played the Limp Bizkit song, I think it's called Break Stuff, at the point where Eduardo's character died, was hysterical. And even that guy was also in this movie. He was in Stranger Things, the most recent season of Stranger Things, and he gets very much typecast in roles like that, and he definitely looked way too old to be a high schooler inside this movie, although maybe he was out of high school. I honestly don't know, and I don't really care about that anyway, but he was very funny, and his death scene killed me. And also the entire beginning of the Techpocalypse in this movie when they're at that party and all the extremely over the top and just gruesome deaths that happened inside of this party and just how over the top and ridiculous they all were. I loved all of that. And quite frankly, I wish there was more of that stuff inside this movie, because yeah, they had that whole, thing where all the chaos starts happening inside this party. You get to see all these crazy death sequences, and I wish we got more of that stuff, because, when you got Garrett's death scene, I thought that was very funny. All the party death scenes were all very funny, but once you get into the final act of the movie, the death scenes kind of stop happening. You get to focus more on the story and the stakes at hand, and I just need this movie to be maybe a little bit more over the top and goofy like those death sequences, but maybe they didn't have the budget to do that, because I do think the money was spent a lot on the practical effects in this movie, which I also did really enjoy. The robots and the mech suits that they have inside this movie are really fun to watch on screen, and the almost stop motion type thing when they have the wires reaching out to bring other tech to these robots to make them bigger and more advanced as they go on throughout the movie was really fun to see as well. And so I see where the money went when it came to the practicality and getting the cast and doing all these fun things, getting Fred Durst inside this movie, but I wish there's a little bit more over the top ridiculous deaths. And that does bring me to the ending of this film, which I thought was a little bit underwhelming. Like I said, I do wish there was a little bit more of the over the top death sequences that happened, but honestly, it's Jaeden's speech that he has at the end of the film that really did fall flat. I don't think that joke was really all that funny, especially when it's supposed to be like, oh, this character is making this inspirational speech and nobody is inspired by it. That part kind of fell flat, but then you get to see Fred Durst sing his song and bring the people together, which was hysterical. I love all that stuff. But the whole the editing thing where they're hacking through the machine and they're able able to bring it all down. It just wasn't as climactic as I wanted it to be for a movie that had as fun of a first 2 acts as it had. And yeah, sure, that little montage with the over-the-top faces when she's doing her thing and she's hacking into the system was really funny to me, but again, I think it was a little bit underwhelming. And I do want to bring up one more film that this movie reminded me of, and that is Mitchells vs. the Machines, which if you haven't seen that, it is a phenomenal animated movie produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and basically the story is exactly the same. Instead, it follows a family and it is animated, and so when it comes to animated films, you can do whatever you want. You can get as big and as crazy as you want it to be, and obviously the style inside of all that and the humor inside of all that is going to be a lot more colorful and quick and witty, and I think that movie was kind of in the back of my mind the entire runtime of this film, because it is kind of the same thing as that, and this movie is kind of the same thing as Superbad and Zombieland and other films like this. It just wasn't as good as any of those other things, and so that might bother some people more than it did bother me, because I do think that this movie has its own, coat of paint essentially with its 90s nostalgia, and so I think it has a little bit on its own to say, even though the movie's originality is pretty much lacking entirely, which again is a little bit off for an A24 movie, and so I guess your opinion may vary. If that does really bother, if you want something that is truly original from A24, yes, this movie is probably going to disappoint you, and if it does, maybe go ahead and watch Mitchells vs. the Machines, because I do think that is the perfect version of this story, unfortunately. But honestly, that's really all I had to say about Y2K, and honestly, I just really wanted to talk about the Fred Durst thing from Smosh in this video. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about, and I got to talk about that, which, every time I get a chance to bring up Smosh in any sort of context, I'm going to bring it up, because I've been watching that channel ever since, literally, 2013, before Anthony even left, and I've watched it actually consistently since Anthony left. And if you think Smosh was over and it wasn't really a thing anymore, it's actually very much still a thing, and Anthony actually bought Smosh along with Ian, and they now co-own the company together, and it's been a really great time there on those channels. So yeah, I'm going to promote Smosh in this video for whatever reason. This video is sponsored by Smosh. Sure, why not?
That was excellent.
Your best bet is to stay away.
But that's going to be it from me for my review for Y2K. What do you guys think about this? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I also did review outs for the new Star Wars show, Skeleton Crew, which came out earlier last week. And I'm going to have weekly reviews outs for that, along with weekly reviews for whatever movie is out in theaters every single weekend. I don't know actually what's next weekend, but Nosferatu is also coming up pretty soon here. So definitely stay tuned for the channel for reviews for movies like that. But that's going to be it for me. Like I said, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one. Your best bet is stay away. Stupid.